Hello everyone. I'm happy to meet the people who is presented now. I know that some people had some issues, medical issues indeed. People who were going to be present face to face today and also connected, so they couldn't connect, but so I know that some people will be interested in following behind. So I'm going to start giving an outlook of what we are going to deal with. So in this first session, which is about the ethical aspects of information systems, we are going to deal with some of the matters that are important for us as the grounding of what the reason why we want to develop a different approach to science, a different approach to information system from the perspective of what we should do, what we can do, and in order to do this, we need to know better. But I want to first state something that is very much connected to what we are going to discuss throughout the whole workshop of glossaLAB workshop of developing and bringing about transdisciplinarity. Today we are in one house that has been very important for the history of León, but also related to something very relevant in the history of Spain, particularly so in the 20th century. So we are hosted in one house that is linked to one of the most remarkable pedagogical projects in the history of Spain, that has many branches, because a lot of the creation, cultural creation, and so culture, science, and even ethical attitudes and so on, that has built up the history of the 20th century, some of the most productive and fruitful parts of the history of Spain, is related to the institutionalism. And we are in one of the houses of this institutionalism. As you may know, the history starts with some people interested in changing, renovating, and doing something in Spain that was in the Enlightenment, in the time of Enlightenment. There was not the development that some of the people wanted to have. There was many things to be done in Spain with respect to the education and to what could be also done in the production of science, knowledge, and so on. And there was a very fruitful movement that starts with this institutionalism, and there is this sentence that comes from Giner de los Ríos: unite without confusing, distinguishing without separating. It's actually a sentence from Krauss. Krauss, as you may know, he was a German philosopher, not a very relevant German philosopher. Not so many people know about Krauss in Germany. He was in the line of Hegel, but he was not so intense, and so the system of philosophy is not as relevant as the Hegelian was. But the interesting thing was the interpretation and the development of the Krauss's ideas, developed first by Sant del Río and later by Giner de los this guy who was kind of the beacon of the institutionalism, Giner de los Ríos. They reinterpreted and did it in a way that somehow connected with some of the best elements of the Spanish culture. So there is a long discussion of what is the reason why actually Kraus was receptive, was taken by these people, when actually Kraus was not that important, and we had the possibility, for example, of receiving the work of Hegel, Schelling, and others, but it was receptive, this Kraus system of philosophy, and re-elaborated first by Sant del Río and finally by Giner de los Ríos. And the reason that many people state is that actually there was, in the Spanish orientation since the humanism, since the Renaissance, there was several components that were kind of preparing the grounds to receive this kind of philosophy, which is systematic. As you see, there is a clear combination of analyticism and synthetic. So the system is one of the most important components of Hegel. The idea that the beings are united and they discover themselves by understanding the unity, but at the same time, we see here the analytical part, so which is different to Hegel. So Hegel couldn't be receptive as it was Kraus, because the value of the individuum and the value of liberalism that we can find since Cervantes, Don Quixote, is plenty of many of the ideas that connect also with the mysticism, with the humanism in the Spanish Renaissance. So in a sense, this is a consequence of the possibilities that emerged so from the crowns of Spain, and it was something very particular of the Spanish culture. So it was maybe not that important that Kraus did the system that illuminated Sant del Río. The important thing is that the components that were somehow waiting to be received, they finally found the path to be developed. And in this house, in the house in which we are, which is the Fundación Sierra Pambley, that for ourselves, so for the whole history of the people who is working together in glossaLAB, we started several years ago, like 14 years ago. We were also hosted in this house, and we created Pitrum. And right now we are trying to give another impulse to the same idea of creating grounds for bringing together knowledge, and we want to bring together knowledge and to develop better knowledge because we need to act upon the world. Ideas that were very much in the development of the Institución Libre de Enseñanza, Residencia de Estudiantes, and all the other institutions connected to the ideas of these people and this movement. So for right now, I'm going to deal with some ethical aspects of information systems. So more concretely, we will develop later in different regards. But today, this is the topic for this session, and I will connect it to the bottom line of the project of glossaLAB and the development of developing transdisciplinary knowledge. This is the connection between the trees and the network, which is, as I will show you, very relevant to what the information systems can do, and what are the riches of it, and what are the limits as well. Then I will speak about the structure of the internet, then about surveillance capitalism, and finally the ethical proposal that we will discuss also later in other sessions, but I will try to give a quick view of it. Starting with the conflicting situation between the tree, the organization of knowledge through a tree. We can see here the tree of knowledge that is depicted in the French encyclopedia, the famous encyclopedia that was organized by Diderot and D'Alembert. Diderot actually was the one who made the more important work in bringing together the different parts that make possible the encyclopedia, in which the most brilliant thinkers of the time were participating. And what we see in this picture is that the organization of the encyclopedia follow a kind of tree-like structure, something that we can see back from the time of Aristotle. Aristotle himself, he proposed an idea of a tree for the organization of knowledge, even for the organization of the categories when we deal with the world. He proposes a kind of tree to be followed in order to distinguish what we are talking about, to distinguish the beings that we are dealing with. We start to make questions in the very trunk, like is it material or not material? Is it animate or it's not animate? And asking very simple questions, we can move on, and then distinguish anything in the world by making fundamental and very simple distinctions. And so the same idea that was first developed by Aristotle, we see that in the 18th century, in the encyclopedia of Diderot and D'Alembert, the structure remains the same. Descartes is the one that is shown on the left of the picture, and Descartes has been the person who depicted more clearly the methodology for finding truths in modernity. And if we go to the rules of the direction of the spirit, that one of the earliest works where he describes the method, he distinguished the importance of two Díaz. One is the analytical one, and the other is the synthetical. For him, the synthetical part is very relevant because we need to keep all the different parts together, as in the sentence of Krauss that I showed you before. We need to keep the parts together at the end, but actually the most important part of the method of Descartes is the analytical side. Because in order to find truths, we need to distinguish clearly and with no doubt whatsoever. So the truths, as Euclides did, while finding geometrical truths, or while demonstrating the simple theorems of geometry, he used a way to demonstrate it in which everything can be reduced to things we have no reason to doubt of. There are some definitions, some axioms, and through the combination of axioms and very simple operations, every step is given in clarity, so with no doubt. So we can move on, and we can break down any problem we want to deal with. We can break it down into simple problems. And so actually the most relevant part of the method of Descartes is this analytical moment. When we arrived to the 18th century, so 1 century after, even a little bit more than 1 century, so the sophistication of the problems addressed by the thinkers of the Enlightenment has increased so much that the synthetical moment that Descartes wanted to stress was practically forgotten. More than forgotten is that the problems were too complicated to make that all the parts would come together. So then they stressed the point and the focus, they stress it on the analytical side. So if we want to really deal with the problems, like several of the problems arising in physics were too complicated and people start to specialize, they needed to break it down into more simple problems. We see that many of the problems of complexity that sometimes were proposed, for example, by Newton himself, he discarded. He didn't want to deal. He couldn't deal with those problems of complexity and complexity in a very limited level. Because, for example, Newton disregards the capacity of dealing with the combination of 3 massive bodies, which is the Earth, Jupiter, and the Sun. You cannot count together with them in order to find out the orbit of the Earth. That was too complicated for the method to be solved. And over time, more and more problems arise, and the way of dealing with was breaking down into specialized areas. And that happened in the 18th century, and the science start to be very specialized, and this is kind of the development of 19th century science in positivism in a very quick view of what has happened. So if we consider that way of moving through the tree of knowledge, it is interesting to see that we can put it very easily, this idea of Aristotle himself, we can put it very easily in the very definition of information as we understand it. So we are going to speak about information systems. So the definition of information that was provided by Claude Shannon in a scientific terms before we have use of the concept of information in the past. Rafael Capurro, that will be today, this evening, he has been one of the scientists that has shown us more about all the meanings of information throughout times since the origins of the Latin world, and how they took also some important and relevant concepts of Greek philosophy, Greek science. So it has a long-term history, as Capurro has shown better than any other. But the very definition, scientific definition in more concrete ways, in a more robust model for the sciences, was provided by Claude Shannon. And we can put it in terms which is very similar to the distinction of what is the case in Aristotle. So if we ask for what is the case in the possibilities of finding, so say what is the case in a very simple situation in which we only have 8 possible states. If we only have 8 possible states and we want to say what is the case, then we can make very easy questions, like, for example, is it less than 5? Or if we answer that with binary distinctions, then we can combine only 3 questions and therefore also 3 answers to state what is the case. So at the beginning we have an initial uncertainty that is dependent on the number of possibilities we have at the end. And while we answer, so what is the case, then we get to the final answer of what is the case. We reduce step by step the uncertainty. So in terms of Shannon, he said, okay, the number of binary distinctions, the number of answers, that's the information I provide when I answer to what is the case. So he put it in terms of the number of possibilities for 3 answers to be given or 3 questions to be given is 2 to the 3. So then, if I wanted to put it in the number of in terms of the number of possible cases, then the relation is the logarithm in base 2. So the logarithm base 2 of the number of alternatives, the number of cases, then we can say that the information we need to know what is the case is the logarithm in base 2 of n, which is this equivalent if all the cases are of the same probability, is the logarithm in base 2 of the inverse of the probability. So this simple idea was taken by Shannon, but as we see, he's kind of moving through the tree of knowledge. So the interesting thing of this is that we have connected very quickly the concept of information with the concept of knowledge. Is it actually equivalent, providing information to having the knowledge? And the interesting thing to think about is that actually here, who has given the meaning? The meaning is always given in the questioning. And for making the questions, you need to have some previous knowledge. So the information plays a role in the gaining of knowledge, but it is not what produces directly the knowledge. So there is some relation between one another, but it's important to distinguish. We have used the metaphor of the tree to find out so how even the world has evolved. So the living species, how they have evolved in our world, in the earth. And what you see here is a representation. What you see in the background with the dark lines. This is a representation of Haeckel in the origin of the species of Darwin. And the representation of Haeckel or of Darwin, it is a tree-like structure. It's a tree, the tree of the living beings, in which each branch, its bifurcation point, corresponds to a bifurcation in the history of the species. So that was as it was depicted, but what happened in the discovery of the last decades with respect to the role of the bacteria, the fungi, the viruses, and so in the evolution or in the co-evolution of the living beings is as it is shown there. There is a very dense connection between all the different species that were shown as being separated. So if we consider our own bodies, so our own bodies are mostly made, so if we count the cells that we contain, most of the cells, they are bacteria. So they are not the cells that contain the DNA that was given us when we were born. They contain many more bacteria and fungi. So there are other living beings that are interacting, and that they are connected not only to other persons, but also to other animals, and even to vegetables and to other living beings, so that make us in very tight connection. So that makes that the living so the tree of the living beings cannot be regarded as the only structure and the only level, the only perspective we can deal with the living beings. There is a co-evolving of the living beings, and this can be better shown by the network. Then the question is, maybe we should also move to the network, because there were several problems that make us difficult to deal with complexity through the tree. We cannot deal with the tree with the complexity of the reality we want to confront. And at the same time, when we organize human systems, like the political systems, or even organizations or enterprises in the business, it happens that we often keep a hierarchical structure, and the hierarchical structure do not correspond really to all the relations that are relevant for this organization to work well and to work properly and to adapt to different situations. There are other relations that are important, and the bureaucratic system that represent well the tree-like organization it does not suffice to cope with the problems we have, and to make that the organization also evolve in the proper way. So often has been put forward that the network is a good way to. Sorry, I was admitting somebody else to the video conference. So it has been proposed that the network offer us a different way of dealing with the understanding of the world, and also dealing with the organization of our activities. And so these discoveries in the past decades has been illuminating the need to move forward, but at the same time it has been sometimes exaggerated too much the capacities of the network, as I will show you. But first, I want to give a very quick view of what is the network, because often we speak of networks, and as Thomas will speak later, there are often metaphors that are dangerous when we don't think in the real meaning of the metaphors. And one of these metaphors is the idea of the network, the network that makes that everything is interconnected, everything can interact with other parts, and that makes us forget that not all the parts are so well connected, and also that the capacity of interacting is not that easy. Okay, so then for that reason, I want to go to the very groundings of the idea of the network, which was a very simple idea that was put forward several centuries ago by Euler in order to solve a very simple problem. That problem was kind of a thinking game. So how is it possible to cross all the bridges of Königsberg when you do it only once? Is it possible to do it? So what path can be taken in order to cross only once the bridges of Königsberg? The problem seemed to be a very simple and not relevant problem, of course, but he observed that it was possible to forget the complexity of Königsberg and consider that we can put it in terms of some nodes and some connections between the nodes. And by putting it in those terms, he found out that Königsberg could not be crossed only once, so all the bridges only once. It was not possible, but several years later, an additional bridge was being built, and that made it possible. The interesting thing is that Euler found out the solution not only for Königsberg, but for any network, no matter how large it is, how complex it is. He find out the necessary and sufficient condition for the network in order to make that, so that you can move throughout all the nodes, passing only once through the relations. So the idea was very simple. I can reduce a complex being that I'm trying to confront. I reduce it to just a collection of nodes, as I saw in picture A, a collection of nodes, and these nodes, they have some relations between them. So network theory is just that. It has that basic element, which is developed from graph theory. So we have nodes and we have relations between them. The interesting thing of network theory is that we can make that the relations correspond to interactions between the parts. So we have two nodes, like node Ni and Ng, and this Ng can interact upon Ni and the other way around. So we have an interaction between the two. When we speak then of interaction, then we find out that we can that we can map very complex situations of any kind, of any nature. They can be, the nodes can turn out to be agents. We can consider agents because agents act, and they act upon other agents. So when we generalize the agent, then we can speak of networks in which physical, biological, human, technical agents are interacting with each other. And we can even mix so physical agents with biological agents with human agents, like for example, we human, when we interact with our environment and we need to eat things and so on. And we humans also interact with technical devices, so we can use it for representing, for mapping very complex situations. Okay, this is the kind of the simple description of the network, as related also to the agents and to the information. I forgot to mention that the interaction, when I speak of interaction, I can also put it in terms of information. When one agent interacts upon other, we can use a generalized definition of information because we are informing the other agent. So the interaction can be reduced to information of one agent into the other, and vice versa. So the information not taken as just a collection of bits, but the forming, so the original meaning of information, so in the broader sense, it can enable us to deal with the interaction, therefore with the complexity of components that are interacting with each other. Another distinction which is relevant and interesting to be done in order to deal with what I want to show you is that we can have agents that are active agents and other agents that are passive agents. So for example, the N1 to N4, they are agents that are active, whereas the other ones, the blue ones, are agents that are only acting in the case that the active ones want to perform some action. So they do not interact by themselves. They only interact when other agents make them interact. So they are called passive agents. So that we can consider the passive agents to see how the action happens. So like the space for the development of the action. We can use it for that, or in other occasions we can just reduce it and say, okay, in virtue of the connectivity provided by the passive agents, then what we have is a connection between these four nodes. We also have other nodes, as you see, that are white, that are not interacting in one situation, but they could become active and then make that they start to be connected. So then we can speak of the active network and the passive network. This is an additional interesting consideration, so to be considered. Sorry, Omar, are you typing down? Maybe you are with the microphone.
Sorry.
No problem. Or I can. Okay, now, great. If we ask also about the autonomous agent, so what is an autonomous agent? We use also a definition of the autonomous agent provided, was put forward by Kaufman. Kaufman called the autonomous agent a system that is capable to perform thermodynamic cycles, so to provide the existential needs of the agent. So this agent could be any kind. Could be a physical agent, could be a chemical agent, could be a biological agent, could be a human agent, or a human with technical interaction as well. But the important thing is that we can perform the thermodynamic cycles in the benefit of the system, of the agent, however it is composed. The interesting thing of doing that is that we can reduce also the thermodynamic cycles. We can reduce it to the information. So we can compute the information that circulates in a network. Imagine N1 to N4. They start to cooperate together and to do something that make them capable to perform thermodynamic cycles. So the interaction is so productive that they actually do what they want, do what they need, do what they intend to do. And we can reduce this in terms of information and then calculate that they are actually contributing into positive thermodynamic cycles. So they are capable of reducing the entropy and to make that the energy grows in the benefit of the system itself. So we can also use information to speak of the capacity to reduce one of the cooperative components of the network. We can reduce to a system that is capable to act by itself. So that is an autonomous agent. An additional sophistication of the idea of the network in order to map things in reality is to consider multi-level networks. So we can speak of the digital network is here put in between, but the digital network is always used by socio-economical agents. So there is therefore actually a socio-economical network, agents that are interactive with each other and that they use the digital network. So we can have one node that has some properties and that interact depending on what level we are looking at. The interaction is different, but it makes that at the other level. So, for example, the interactions in the digital network make that the interaction at the level of the socio-economical network really work well. And it is here represented with a boundary. So here we have the social system. The social system interacts with the biospherical environment, whatever being there is in this environment. And in some cases, we even have the capacity that this is connected also to the digital network, because we are using a lot of sensing of the world around us. And we are operating with all those data, with all that information, and to make it so for different purposes. But at the same time, we have something that we of course need for speaking of socio-economical network. We also have a transportation network for materials and goods to move around. We need a distribution network of production of food. We need a water supply network, and of course, we need the production and distribution of energy. So when we bring all together, then we can find out what is necessary for a network to work. And as we see, I have distinguished here different elements that are fundamental for a network to be complete. So we need energy to make transformation possible. We need matter, which can also be thought in terms of stabilizing energy. So matter, and finally information. So we need information to transform the matter. We need information to drive the energy. And finally, we have all together, so the socio-economical system that is capable to perform the interactions, whatever are done, thanks to all the levels below. Something which is important that I want to stress the importance is the difference that exists between the network and the system. So before I saw a boundary, I say here is the social system, and we could speak also here we have the digital network system. Here we have the transportation system, and there are things around that do not belong to the system, but they belong to the network. And in order to approach to that, I want to just to show and to remember a little bit the origin of the kind of cells that we are. So we are a combination of a huge amount of cells of the same kind, which are eukaryotes. We are as a super kingdom. We belong to the eukaryote. The eukaryote is the kind of cell that contains the nucleus, and in the nucleus we contain the DNA, and in the DNA is taken so from the inside of the nucleus, and then we build up all the proteins we need. At least for the eukaryotes, as I mentioned before, we are multicellular organism, and any multicellular organism need also to count with bacteria and fungi and to make them work. Okay, but at the beginning, what we had, we are speaking of the many thousands, so several thousands of millions of years. There were prokaryotes, which are more simple cells than the eukaryote, of different kind. And what happened is that they start to interact, and finally, not only interacting, they start to become to interact more intensely, so to say. They start to build that you see kind of a border. Finally, here we already have kind of a good delimitation of what the cell is, and finally we have a perfect kind of border to distinguish. So what is the inside? What is the cell itself? And what is the outside? It doesn't mean that the cell can be defined only by the things that are inside. Of course, the parts that are outside are relevant because they need to interact with the outside, but there is a difference in the capacity of controlling and the capacity of using and transporting the energy and the matter. So to perform those thermodynamical cycles that I mentioned before. So we need also a stable frontier that enables the development of the regulatory capacities. So in order to have a sustainable system or an autonomous agent to survive in the environment, the network is not enough. We also need the system that requires kind of a border. And this border, it is not an isolation, this is also a way of communication. So need to be in good and permanent contact with the environment, good interaction with the environment. It needs to distinguish and need to regulate and needs to create a different kind of relations in the inside and in the outside. So finally, then with those preliminaries of what is a network and what is a system and what is the relation, then I want to go to the structure of the global information and communication system, because this is kind of our proposal of how should we deal differently with information systems, and how could we build up differently also the information systems. Let me start something to read. This is an allegorical approach to what I want to show. What I'm showing you, what I'm going to treat you now, is kind of an allegory, an approximation. So just taking as a tale that I'm going to use for letting us think in the following. So imagine a kind of city constituted by a vast number of squares, where people meet and engage in different activities, but among which there is a scarce number of streets you can see. Some people move along them, but if you pay close attention, the number of people popping up or leaving each square are much more than the ones moving along the streets. We distinguish at the sides of the squares some doors through which we distinguish at the sides of the square some doors through which lots of people pass through. The doors are guarded by watchmen who either let the people enter or not. It may be a sort of custom office, so it is difficult to see whether there is anyone charging. Some of these doors seem to be just for distinguished people, we guess, for whom the doors are open when they intend to pass through. But there are other doors which are transited by the masses. Considering the global flow, it is quite obvious that great avenues connecting the squares must be away from the eyes, but they have to be somewhere, surely underground. And indeed, the people moving in that underworld must be tremendous, just by taking into account the large number of people in the squares with respect to the people moving along the visible streets. There is another clue to glimpse the complexity of such underworld. Most of the people, before leaving one of these squares, go to a kind of a small pavilion, seem to ask for something, and then they go straight forward to some of the doors. Only in strange cases, you get to see people going straight to the doors without passing by these pavilions. We presume it may be the complexity of the underworld they are about to enter what made that people need to be informed. We also guess there is no cartography at hand about the underground streets. Maybe it were too complex for human awareness. Although all that are mere conjectures, we state from our bird's-eye view of this weird city. Nevertheless, it is quite clear that there is no way to acknowledge the semblance of this city from any other one we have experience of. So with this allegory, that by the way you can find it, it is published in an article published in a Springer, Cyber Subsidiarity Towards Global Sustainable Information Society of 2018 or 19, I don't remember exactly. The idea is, what we want to put forward is that this is allegorically the situation in which we are, okay? But let me use again, so the idea of the network. So in order to find out, so what is the real structure of the internet? So this is the, so to say, the lyric of the internet. So we all belonging to the internet are interconnected, or have the capacity of being interconnected with anyone. Kind of horizontal situation in which everything seemed to be well connected with any other node. Barabasi took a look to how it really is. And he found out that the real structure is different. It's kind of what is being called in network theory, pre-scale network, that it doesn't matter at what side you are looking, you take only one part of the network, and you see the same structural properties that when you see the whole. And if you do it, you make a zoom, you will see again the same properties. So it is kind of a fractal structure. And they also have the properties of the small wall, a concept also of network theory, that the distance between any two nodes is not too large. Those are good properties. Actually, they are not that bad, but that do not correspond to the original ideas of the internet. So Parent, when he proposed it, this is the picture you have on the left. This is in the article of Parent, when he was asking himself, so what structure should have the internet? He put like three extreme situations, or two extreme situations and one in between. One extreme situation is the perfectly centralized network in which every node is connected to one. This is very economic because you need very few elements to have everything connected, and it's at a very short distance, because any two nodes by passing through the central node can be reached in only 2 jumps. In the other extreme situation, the perfectly distributed network, which is very alike to our circulatory system network, on the level of the lower level. So, for example, the one that arrives to our skin. So all the nodes are connected with nodes around. What is the difference when we go from one to the other? Here, in the centralized network, like for example a broadcast network, if we make that the central node disappears, the network vanishes, nothing remains. Here, if we take one node again, away, if we take one of the nodes away, practically nothing happens. So, like in our circulatory system, blood keep on circulating, and we have blood that is accessible to any part of our body. So then the idea for us was we want something like this. And in between, we have the decentralized networks, in which we have some nodes that are much more connected than others. So it can happen, for example, if I, for example, eliminate one of these nodes, then most of the network keep on working. I eliminate this node, and as well, there are many possibilities in which most of the network keep on working. But for example, if I destroy this one, what happened is like in the Roman Empire. So then only islands of networks remained. Okay, and this is not makes that the network, the centralized network, from the perspective of Parent, is also not a good candidate. But actually, what Barabasi found out through the investigation of how it did really evolve so 30 years after the discussion of no 30, almost 40 years after the discussion of Parent, he found out that the real structure is more like the one in between. But in addition, if we consider, so who is really connected in the world? So it happens that there is a large number of people who is absolutely not connected to the internet, has no internet access whatsoever. And at the same time, the capacity of some of the nodes to be connected with others are very unequally distributed. Okay, this is how the real structure is, and just based in the figures given by the World Bank in the digital dividendum. There are many people who has absolutely no access. There are some people who are at an indirect reach. People with high-speed connection is a very small part of the world. So it is of course not the way shown in the lyric. Nonetheless, if we take a look to the passive network, which is what connects the nodes, this is a representation of the IP nodes for just one part of the internet, but it was a significant part as to reflect the structural properties of the network of the main of the nodes of the internet. This is from several years ago, like more than 10 years ago, but is very similar to our own today. What the interesting thing of this passive network, in which the IP addresses are connected with each other, is that they have structural properties which are very similar to the brain. So when this investigation was done, some people were very satisfied and very happy to say, okay, the internet has already provided the brain that we need. So for the brave new world which we are stepping on. However, when we ask ourselves, so how do we really connect with the IP addresses? When you go to the internet, when you access any asset in the internet, do you type down the IP address? Or what do? You usually need something else. Like, for example, you Google it, if you look for something, or maybe you know the URL of a domain or whatever. So you don't use the IP address. You look for, and when you look for some particular asset, what you are doing is you are accessing to some of the few data, so super data systems, or how they call data centers, to the large data centers that we have. Most of them are allocated in North America and Europe. And when we consider that, then we see that when we put together the passive network with the active network, then we find things like this one. Or before that, let me show you that these are the most important nodes in the world. This is with the values of 4 years ago. The most important nodes in the world, they are in Europe. They contain the most of the traffic of the internet flow, the data flow, the information flow. The highest ones and the highest connections are between the Germany and the Netherlands, London and Netherlands, London and France. So here is where we have the strongest nodes and the strongest network. And also the United States had a good connection, and the United States provide connection to other ones. But then when we take a look to, for example, Latin America, or when we take a look to Europe, then we observe the following actual network. So considering both the passive and the active network, which the data centers count, we see that there is practically no real network. This is a very, very much like a star-like network with a center in Miami. So we have the center of the star in South America and Miami, and we only have a few connections between some nodes that has become more relevant, but you see that the most relevant part of the flow of information is always with the center of the star. So the interesting thing here is that Latin America has a lot of components in common with any other country: cultural relations, problem relations, and but they don't have connections between each other. Or even worse is in France, in Africa. In Africa, most of the connections go either to Europe or to North America, and there is practically no connection between any two nodes in Africa. So that means they don't have the network that we're supposed to show as a great way to deal differently with problems. So in the age of surveillance capitalism, we have already experienced situations like what was shown in 2016, 2017, with the Brexit referendum, and here it's shown also with the Trump elections, in which Trump won. It was observed something that has already been claimed by many institutions beforehand. So since 2012, there were some international protocols to say that the filter bubbles could be a problem. And the filter bubbles is the idea that the search engines work in order to increase the permanence of the users to one particular service, or like, for example, to Google or to Facebook. And in order to be linked, to be attached, the technology that has been developed so that they find out the better answers to the questions that are being put. So they are the ones that create the connections, and those connections make these filter bubbles in which people who think the same and sometimes not even, for example, they propagate much faster the lies than the truths, and so on. So this creates a resonance box in which the groups start to integrate more and to segregate from other groups. Something that, if we want to consider our countries as democracies, as was shown by Rousseau, something that is very important is the development of the general will. And how can we speak of general will when we have these confrontations and this could be predicted? And it was predicted that the result was, as we see, one of the final results was the separation of Great Britain, United Kingdom from Europe in one case, and in the other case, the election of Trump with strong confrontations, as we saw a couple of years ago. It was when the people came into the Congress. So the confrontation has been very often seen. Through the development of these technologies, what we see is that what was criticized in the previous era of the spectator democracy, with the medias that we have, with the television and the other medias that were used in order to manipulate, kind of very shown to be very easy to be shown. People were manipulated that was a bridge to real democracy. The picture that I am showing you here on the right, I'm not going to stop it, but I recommend you to take a look to the manufacturing consent. That's a book from Chomsky, and there is a film that you can see it. You can find it very easily in the internet, and it's really worthwhile seeing it. This is from the Canadian television. It's a documentary that is about the work of Chomsky, but particularly about this idea of manufacturing consent. So how the medias manufactured the consent and how this was a real breach of what could really be understood as democracy. So that was clearly, it was kind of clear how it worked, but what we have now in what has been termed by Zuboff as capitalism surveillance or surveillance capitalism, we have that they based on the utilization of all these information technologies. What we see on the left, it is so the famous panopticon, Bentham panopticon. So that's the jail in Chicago. Interestingly, so Bentham, the idea of Bentham is to implement a device in which the people finally get to behave according to the rule, even to the people who were not behaving as they supposed to behave. So it was an idea of how to reincorporate people to society, because by being perfectly watched, being perfectly observed, then at the end they are going to behave, to attach to some specific values and norms, and to make that the system work well. Bentham and later on Tarde developed some ideas that are partially connected. Tarde had also similar concerns as Bentham had. And what we have now is a situation which is kind of different, but it is technologically different, but not so much in the very bottom idea of being perfectly watched, as probably many of you have already seen this film. How is it called? The social dilemma. The social dilemma. So how all these information engines work, so the search engines work, and how the social networks work, and how they are creating all this confrontation in a way that is technologically different, but at the end the consequences is the creation, as Zuboff has shown, of create monsters, kind of the surveillance capitalism in terms of the big giants, the big economic giants like Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook. You see there the business volume in terms of millions North American dollar, millions of North American dollars. In the middle, we have the market capitalization. We have values that we have never seen. So if we compare with business that we criticized a couple of decades ago because they were too large, we have a situation in which this monster has become even much bigger than that. And it is also shown the net outcome. So the values are impressive. So if we compare the correlation of forces, when we compare the market value with the gross national product, again in millions of North American dollars, then we see that there are some of these companies, like for example, so Facebook is equivalent to a large country as Argentina. Alphabet, in which Google is included, is as large as a significant part of Africa. Amazon as 9 South American countries. Apple like the Netherlands. We have Netflix. Netflix is like 5 Balkan countries. Microsoft is like 8 European countries. And so the size is impressive. But when we ask about the workers, then the number of the workers is really practically nothing in comparison to the volume, the economical volume that they have. You see, this is not in millions, it is in absolute value. Facebook only 35,000. Amazon, because they need more people, they are a little bit larger. But we have Google lesser than 100,000. Interestingly, as Zuboff has shown, when we compare these digital giants with other industry that was criticized very much in the 90s because it was very automatized and it was a problem for the workers because many people were losing their jobs. When we compare the market value with the workforce, the comparison has multiplied by 100. So now the market value with respect to the workforce has multiplied by 100, or the other way around. So the work value, the value of the workers, has divided by 100. Then our proposal is, so then how can we do it differently? So if we are speaking of this digital world, let's take a look to the living beings. So if we consider in the living beings, so how it has organized, so the life, how it has the different structure has emerged. So from very simple ones. So at the beginning we have, as I showed you in the development of the eukaryote, we had only prokaryotes, and the eukaryote create the basis for the multiplication of the species in the Phanerozoic. Then right after, so we have this spiral of development with so many different living beings has been created. It's interesting to take a look to how this complexity has been created, how these were capable to evolve and to adapt to many different circumstances. We had kind of incredible catastrophes, geological and of different types. But in any case, life always adapted to different circumstances. What we have now in what era, if we ask ourselves in what era we are, actually the paleontologists will find out that the footprint of our civilization is really relevant. So we have plastics, we have a lot of materials, we have done so many changes, even in geography. So they are so remarkable that we have already left a footprint for future to come. For paleontologists of other world, if they come, they would find that there was one time that we call it now the Anthropocene, because we are changing too much. So the question is, what can follow the Anthropocene? What can come after? So our answer, if we are capable to adapt, is the Symbiocene. This is the proposal of many people. That is not an idea of myself. The Symbiocene is the idea that we need to adapt to what exists. And in order to deal with that, I just recall, and this is what is our proposal for the information systems, is to recall the simple idea of Althusius. Althusius was a Calvinist in the 16th, 17th century, and as a Calvinist, that they have their own values and that they need to live in the Catholic Imperium. They have to live there, and not only they have because they didn't have other possibility to do it, but because also the higher system was also beneficial for them. He devised the idea that it is possible to combine the autonomies of the Calvinists for them or any other community that they want to have their own values, to combine them with the possibility of being connected to the higher system, to the larger system of the political system of this Catholic world at that time. That was his proposal, and he developed then the idea of subsidiarity. Nowadays, the idea of subsidiarity is like the principle for the organization of large system is the United Nations consider a basic principle for any complex organization of any large organization in the political systems. In the case of Europe, for the European Union, so the subsidiarity is one of the fundamental principles for our constitution. We have discussed this in one article. Cyber subsidiarity was a global sustainable information society. I mentioned it before, and also in the ICTs connecting global citizens that I wrote together with Volgan and other Austrian colleagues. So the idea is to have this the structure. We don't want to have the centralized relations, which is very much what we have in the information system. So if we compare the information system that we have with something like this that we can actually find in the biological structures. This is kind of the collection of the information that we have using what I showed you before of the structure of the internet and the information flow. Most of the flow is concentrated in a few nodes, so there is a huge concentration of that. And what we really need is kind of having the development of this subsidiarity means that we require also local networks that have the capacity to interconnect more the parts that are more directly connected to the problems. And this is the basic idea of subsidiarity. So what do we need in order to deal with the problems? So this is kind of the proposal also to consider that this is a good way of dealing with large political systems, and we don't even need to have a very large one. The idea that we need to deal with the problems at the level in which the problem can be more easily be solved, at the level in which we can react more quickly, more directly. But at the same time, the subsidiarity concept has the idea that we also need kind of a central view in order to see that that there is nothing left aside, in the sense that if some necessity is not being covered, some of the issues can be also better handled at the higher level. So there are problems that are better being dealt at a lower level, and other problems that are better dealt at a higher level. So it's a combination of just having the proper connection so that we can deal with the problems at the most efficient network of components to tackle the problem. So the proposal is to create a system of that kind. So for the information systems, in which we make, so from the individuum, like what Giner de los Rios was also proposing in this idea of the institutionalism that I start to speak with about, is that everything needs to depart in the autonomy of the individual, the capacity of the individual to interact, to create a cooperative group, the cooperation between the group, between a team, create the basis for an institution to work. The interaction between the institution is the basis for a larger system to work, and so on and so on. Here it is the presentation for, I just refer the scientific system, but we could refer other systems. And the way we should create the systems that are capable to perform these thermodynamical cycles efficiently is considering Ashby's law of required variety. This is an idea of Stafford Beer. What I'm talking about is the viable system model put forward by Stafford Beer, in which the complexity of the organization need to be at least higher than the complexity of the problems that the environment the complexity of the environment related to the problems that the system is willing to confront, or is going to confront. So it needs to have a larger complexity than the problems that needs to be handled. And we combine systems of this kind. I'm not going into the details because we will speak about this later. But the idea is that instead of having a kind of perfect horizontal system in which all the information, as with the digital giants are doing, all the information is being collected for the benefit of, for example, one company, like it can be Alphabet or Facebook. Instead of making that anything goes to the benefit of that, then organize it in different levels so that we solve the problems that at each level are being dealt. And only the information that is meaningful for solving the problems at a higher level is what is being shown here with the percolation of meaningful information. Only what is being meaningful, because it's needed to solve the problems of the higher level, is what needs to be circulated. We don't need to have the huge amounts of information flows that we are having, because most of the information contains the solution of the problems. So this is kind of our proposal for taking ethically, so from the perspective of the individual until the global perspective. So thank you very much. Maybe I was too long. Do you want to ask? Thomas, Omar, Rafael?
Do you think that the beer, because the Stafford beer?
No problem, because you're catching.
Because he developed later another methodology.
The team.
Yeah. Team synergetics.
Team synergetics. Yes, of course, I think so for the, but that's so for the lower group. Yes, I think that's also worthwhile.
But because he was criticized for the first approach, the viable system, that it's too strict, that it doesn't allow for free communication, free discussion, and that it is not democratic enough. Prescriptive.
Yeah. But that depends on how the system is finally implemented. Because if the system, if you create one system, like for example the cyber SIM, the cyber SIM, okay, you have the people who has the access, and so that makes you have like a kind of very well defined boundary. So that depends on how you define the boundaries.
Yeah.
So if in the boundaries of the system, of each system, you create the capacity to make that other people can interact and that they can integrate if it is proper to do it. But of course, something that is very important in the viable system to work is that it has to be effective. So it has to take part of the system. So one of the problems with the systems, like for example the cyber SIM, was that they were oriented just for the articulation of the problem they had. And they had the people in the factories and the people in the government and so on and so on. So all those connections were kind of well defined, and it was closed in that regard. It was not open, but you can also do it more openly. Is the idea, and additionally, so this is the idea of cyber subsidiarity, is that you need to have the network as the space for the emergence of a system. So we speak of cyber subsidiarity instead of more viable system model, because we speak also of the dynamics of the different agents that can interact and create a system. But it's not the system. If you have the system, you need the viable system model, I think. But if you want to see how this system is created, and you also create the possibilities for the system to evolve, then you also need kind of the environment in which other groups can come together and develop that. Okay. I can give you an example of that. I think one of the best examples for the viable system model of this idea to be developed is the cooperative environment in the Basque Country. There we have a large system, which is the Mondragon cooperative system. And Mondragon cooperative system, they never follow the idea of Stafford beer. But when John Walker tried to find out how the system was, and wanted to make a diagnosis of the cooperative, he found out that it was the most perfect realization of the viable system model. and but actually they never follow such a thing. But okay, but this is the Mondragon cooperative system, cooperative corporation. But in the Basque Country, there are a large amount of cooperatives, and this is an environment. And you see all the time that cooperatives are created, and groups of cooperatives are created, that they interact with each other, and so they are very open. And even the system of Mondragon is so well connected with the environment that often they help other groups to work together. So whenever I wanted to interact with them, they were always open. But they also have like their own channels for them to work. So the idea of the cyber subsidiarity is that we are speaking also of the network to create the environment for the cooperation to happen. Okay. So it's already 1:30. So
yeah, I think we should have a lunch and then move. Or
okay, and then we deal with that later. With your points. Okay. So
there may be more people in the afternoon. So
so probably we have more people. So in this evening. Thank you very much. So Omar and Rafael, don't you have any comment to do?
Well, I just have I'm sorry. Go ahead, Omar. I'm sorry.
Please, Rafa.
We don't hear you, Omar. We don't hear you.
Yes, thank you, Jose Maria. Sorry, for me, it's a new question. I am physics and I only listen. Or do you see?
I can imagine you are in Santander now? Or?
Yes, I am in Santander now. I am here in Cantabria University.
Yeah, great. In any case, for a physicist, even something that we have considered, so with Rainer Zimmermann, is even at the level of the physical systems, and even before, like in quantum gravity, you can even think in networks. So at the very lowest level of the spin networks, so before the geometry is being created with the physical laws, this is the approach of the gravitational relativity. They even speak of the cooperation that happens between those. So with all those elements, those spins that interact with each other, and when we have a kind of successful cooperation between the spins, then we have already a spin network upon which we can build more physical systems. So even at the level of the pre-geometry and in physical, in theoretical physics, is being used this concept. So Rainer has developed it very much, and we have some publication about it, because you need to explain it, even so how the complexity is being created, so from the most fundamental levels.
Okay, thank you. I need to learn more about this. That for me is very hard.
So, thank you, Omar. And Rafael?
Yes, thank you very much, Jose Maria. I found a very, very interesting and challenging presentation. And especially, I liked very much the presentation about the multi-level networks, about energy and matters and social systems and so on. But I just have a doubt from your presentation, which says ethical aspects of information systems, and it's very clear how the information systems are structured and so on, which is very interesting. But what I didn't get clear was where is the ethical aspects? Are they in the system? Are they in the environment? And they in both, and they interact? This is what I didn't understand very much about word the ethical, because this is something that I'm very interested in. And this is something lacking in our society about the ethical aspects of our structures and our society. And I think if we have a very good structure about where ethics are and how they can be managed, I think it would be very useful for the society.
Thank you. That's a very relevant, and it goes to the core. Why is it ethical? Actually, I think we published one article several years ago that is an ethical approach for living in complexity. I think I tried to make the point clearer there than maybe here, and there is another one that is. So I need to take a look because I don't remember the titles. Ethics at the age of information. But the idea is the following. So first of all, the ethics means that you need to make decisions. So we need to distinguish, because often we confuse ethics with moral. So in the ethics, you can even put in question so the systems of value, and you can think, so what can be the better way of dealing with this? So how can we better solve this problem? How can we find a better ethical or moral attitude? How can we find better values? So we can go ahead or to state even before, so we come to the moral judgment. In the moral judgment, it's like, okay, you already have some kind of system of values, and then you just apply. So of course it needs to be related, but I think it's important to draw the line between the ethical thinking and the moral thinking. But in the ethical, and at the beginning, and this is the reason we can even find for the ethics of Socrates and Plato. What they were asking is, how can I better act? But in order to better act, I need to know what exists, what there is. TST, what was the question of Socrates? Because if I don't know what there is, if I cannot predict what is going about to happen, this is a sentence of Stafford Beer. If I don't know what is going to happen next, I cannot make proper decisions. So it always happens in the knowledge. So then I need a good system of knowledge in order to know what can happen, what is going to happen, and what will happen in case that I make this decision or the other. So first, I need to know. And in order to know, then I also use the information systems. But they need to be properly combined. So this is somehow in order to underpin the relation of our glossaLAB as a platform for the development and co-creation of knowledge. We need to know in order to act. That's one thing. The other thing is we can consider the situation of the people within an informational system, that this is the technology that is given us, and we just use it, and we need to take care. And the other situation is that, okay, we are really the ones who are developing the systems. And what kind of systems we really want. So we are acting. Of course, we don't have the power that Google has. But we have the power to organize the informational systems for ourselves as to make something like this. So if I need to interact, as I shown here, if I need to interact with these people because it's closer to the problem, not necessarily in geographical distance, but it's closer to the issues that we are dealing, I need to have the connections. And I need to think about considering the technologies that we have. And at the same time, we are the ones that are developing technologies, because we can check, we can modify this. We can see what information, when we speak of percolation of meaningful information, we are stating, so what information are we going to let that flows to the higher level? So in order to have something like this, we need to develop the network. So if we have a network of this, like everybody connected with the telephone and then connected to Google and Twitter and Instagram and so, each of them are kind of networks of this kind, centralized networks. Everything goes to a center, and then the center makes the decisions for the benefit of that enterprise, usually, no? And so the idea is that if we really want to deal with the problems we have at stake, we need to develop these networks, and this network is being done by how we create the connections between the people, what information we exchange, how we filter the information that is relevant instead of just letting everything flow. And in particular, ourselves, so we have one technical part of this idea of developing subsidiarity or cyber subsidiarity is the creation of these filtering systems. So how we can make it that this work. I don't know if I made the point.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Did I convince at any or not? Do you see it so ethical or not? Okay, so I think we can leave it now because so we need to move to the next session in the late afternoon. This will be in another place, so we need to go to the campus of León. So right now we are in Sierra Pambley, and we need to go there. So we will have lunch in León, so we can meet us at 4. Okay.
Okay.
So thank you very much, and see you later.
See you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.